Okay.
Good afternoon or good morning, wherever you are. Welcome to this TPC webinar. Do I need a new website? We'll be underway shortly, just letting a few people in. While we do that, I'm going to launch a quick poll because it's on some of the things we'll be talking about later on. So I'm just going to launch that. A couple of quick questions to get us going about changing websites. What's the reasons to change website? And also about the life cycle, in your opinion, of a website. So, just while we're waiting for everyone to join, quick poll then on what's the most common reason for people changing a website, in your opinion? Is it an out of date CMS? Where Drupal go out of date, Drupal 6, I think it was. You get an issue with a supplier, maybe branding changes. Maybe you buy a new venue to add to your organization, or maybe you have a new ticketing system. So, what's the kind of reasons you change website, and also on the life cycle of a website? But will be underway in a minute or two, just waiting for a few extra people to join, and then we'll be underway. Okay, we'll share the thanks for the people who voted on that poll. We'll share the results. Maybe we'll follow up by email on reasons for people changing websites. Welcome. My name is Andrew Thomas. I'm the director of Ticketing Professionals Conference, and we're bringing back a few webinars this autumn, mainly focused on websites and digital products. It was a big thing that came up at TPC 25 and a half in London. So we will move on shortly. Apologies, there's a few things today that are going to be a bit different because we were reliant on a few technologies that are powered by Cloudflare, which today is having a bit of an outage. We'll be about 25 minutes running. And for those of you who've not used Zoom webinar before, which I doubt there's many of you, if you want to ask a question, head down to the bottom of the screen and there's a Q&A option at the bottom. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to our host today, which is Katie Moffat. Katie, over to you to introduce yourself.
Hello. Thanks, Andrew. Sorry, I failed at the first hurdle there by not putting that this slide on. Anyway, I'm sure you all know how to use Zoom. Hi, everyone. So I am Katie Moffat. I'm a freelance digital strategy consultant. Before that, I was director sector strategy at Substrat Digital Agency, who work in the arts and culture sector specifically. And the reason for mentioning that is as part of that role, I reviewed literally hundreds of RFPs and had many, many, many conversations with organizations who were having problems with their websites, who were thinking about rebuilding them, who were also thinking about maybe we can get away with not rebuilding them. Can we just fix what we have? And so very mindful that that is a challenge for people. Of course, in the arts and culture sector, budgets are very challenging, both in the UK, North America, everywhere really. And so trying to unlock money, finance for either a significant piece of improvement work or a rebuild can be difficult. And again, we want to talk about that today. Um, so in terms of the sort of, again, a bit more about the kind of why we're doing it, some of this will be very self-evident, but I do think it's worth saying as a starter for 10. Your website is absolutely your, the most, alongside your venue, most important organizational asset in terms of driving revenue, but also showcasing other important areas of work like learning and participation, education, and the reality of it is that I think it's 2025. Generally, people are a lot more savvy about these things now. But Having said that, I have certainly come across many, many sites that have been left to degrade, really. Typically, again, some of you will absolutely be aware that typically when a website is built by an agency, it then, once it's gone live, it goes into a support level agreement. And that might be as simple as fixing bugs and perhaps updating to new versions of CMS, but it could be, more significant work than that. But generally, outside of day-to-day support, often what you find with sites is over the years, they do need bigger pieces of work. And without that regular review, issues can become a lot more critical. So I know signed up for the webinar that I'm sure some of you are thinking about a new website for yourself, for a client. Others on the session are, I know, very knowledgeable about this topic and related issues, technical integrations and so on. So, we welcome at the end your thoughts, comments, advice. Um, so let's start off by thinking about what a good website is, because people, the premise of this is if your site isn't good, then you will need to significantly improve it or rebuild it. But what does good mean? Which can sound like an odd sort of thing to say, but often again people have multiple times in the past people have said I think it's okay, or this seems to be an issue, or this is not doesn't work great, but I think it's fine really. um Also, let's remember, hence the screenshot. So this is a screenshot of the National Gallery website in 2003. um Digital moves very fast. Best practice changes all the time. What was good 10 years ago, 5 years ago, even 2 years ago, might not be good now. And that's both in terms of technology that powers a platform, but also the overall user experience. In the end, a good website is one that meets user needs, supports your organizational goals, both commercial goals, but any wider charitable aims you may have, and is easy to update and maintain. So, yeah, pretty straightforward, really. Um, Again, talking about the conversations I've had over the years, and some of you will no doubt have had, about whether websites need rebuilding. And this time our screenshot, as you can see, is 2004 National Theatre. I actually quite like that design. I think it doesn't actually look old-fashioned, but anyway. Um, Comments like our CMS is annoying, we need a whole new one. Um, our audience has changed, we need a whole new site. A new site will fix our ticketing issues, and we need to rebuild because we've rebranded. And those things on their surface can sound absolutely like you may need to do a significant piece of work or start from scratch. But actually, they're not necessarily grounds to rebuild entirely. You may be able to fix things and significantly improve on what you've got. So we'll come back to that in a second. Having said that, often the catalyst for really getting into these conversations, both internally and with external suppliers, is because issues start to pile up. So customers start to complain about poor user experience. You will see, or you do see, declining engagement metrics, other important kind of metrics around performance. It can start to look very visually dated, which I think is a whole other discussion, because there's often trends in website design. So, for a few years, it's all about XYZ, big fonts and bright colors, and then it returns to kind of a stripped back style. That's not, that's a slightly different thing to when something starts to look like it's old and a bit rubbish. Obviously, things like limitations with CMS can be a real issue, and lots of organisations struggle with this. So, it's a nightmare for staff to update a CMS. It takes them ages, doesn't do exactly what they need, etc., etc. You might have significant issues with structure, navigation. Your search doesn't work in quite an intuitive way. It's sort of returning weird things high up in the, so that's your internal search I'm talking about there. And of course, Andrew said at the beginning, sort of organizational changes. So things like your organization might acquire a new venue, you might have a completely new brand, and with that, and also perhaps a new strategy around what the organization is going to focus on. So those sorts of things, can start to really drive the conversations about, okay, well, maybe we do need to really look at this in more detail. So coming on to the sort of major part of this webinar, do we fix what we've got or rebuild it, and how do we decide? Um, you don't want to throw money. Nobody wants to throw money on something that's structurally unsound, like in the same way you don't want to repaint a house that has sort of major structural problems. It might look nice for a while, but the problems haven't gone anywhere. But equally, a new website is a big commitment. So what we'll look at now is how you can evaluate the current state of your site, and then how you can make that decision about whether fixing or rebuilding. So here's another screenshot for you, this time South Bank Centre, 2002, um, which is a very long time ago now. So first of all, we need to conduct an MOT of your existing site. This is the kind of thing, if you have in-house expertise, that might be happening on a sort of semi-regular basis, but if you don't have in-house expertise, it may be something that you've not had to do before. So talking you through the kind of different elements of what go into this. So in general, you can consider that like a site MOT covers things like user experience. So how intuitive are user journeys? How accessible is the site, and does it conform to accessibility standards? Essentially, how easy and effective is it to use? Performance, obviously, some kind of technical stuff there around page speed. How easy is it to use on a mobile? How fast is it to load? What about things like the environmental impact of the site? Do you even have an idea of what the environmental impact of the site is? If it was built a long time ago, you may find some significant issues with that. Content is often a big driver, for, well, a big sort of area that you need to look at, I should say. So, is your content helping you to sell tickets, attract donations, demonstrate the impact of your community work, whatever else you need to do? And of course, technical foundations. So this is the kind of stuff that people will just know straight away. Yes, the CMS is really shonky to use. It doesn't, our CMS doesn't integrate with our course booking software, or maybe our email newsletter software. What about things like security? There's been numerous unfortunate examples over the last couple of years of arts and culture organisations being hacked. Security is a really critical one to if you are going to kind of look at the site overall, that is absolutely something that you should be considering. So to talk you through some of these things, again, some of these won't be new to you. Other things may be newer in terms of the sort of the process of going about gathering this kind of data. Google Analytics is your kind of arguably the simplest tool, and the one that most people are familiar with, to help you assess effectiveness. It's a kind of bedrock tool. And nowadays, other people are using different tools like Matomo, which is a kind of equivalent to Google Analytics, but people that use it often say they prefer it because it's more ethical than Google. But essentially, what these tools are doing is they're helping you to understand how people are using the site. Yes, how they got there, but once they get there, what are they engaging with? What are they looking at? What pages are they viewing? When are they dropping out of the ticket buying funnel, etc. So really super important that you start with that. And although I started working with Google Analytics in sort of 2009, and then it was a lot less common for people generally to be familiar with it. Now most people are, but still it's something that sometimes people only look at when they really have to. Um, so the one thing I will just say quickly on Google Analytics or any analytics tool like that is it is important to think about wider context. So what I mean about that is two main points really. You might see that sales on the website have dropped year on year for a particular month or group of months maybe. But of course that might have been due to something to do with programming rather than programming changes to the artistic program, I mean, rather than website issues. So really what you're looking for is you're looking for trends rather than outliers. The other thing that it can be useful is to look for benchmarks and speak to peers about, so, similar types of organizations. I think fortunately in the arts and culture and that wider sort of um, museums, heritage, visitor attraction sector, people are very open and happy to share things. Substract did a benchmark cultural website benchmark report 2 years running that I was involved in and wrote. Those sorts of data points can help to set your data in context. So they're not the be all and end all, but they can help you to not get fixated on a particular thing and think, okay, well that looks, it seems like our donation kind of the number of the number or the proportion of donations that we're getting through the website is seems to be generally in line with the sector as a whole. That sort of stuff can help. So analytics tell you about what is happening, but we can also kind of overlay other data points and insights onto that. Heat mapping tools are really useful if you suspect you've got an issue with the user interface and navigational elements to show you where people are clicking or kind of, frustrations with clicking around particular pages. Um, Pop-up surveys, I think actually massively underused as a tool, not just for this process around conducting a full site MOT, but actually from time to time testing different different sort of parts of your site for different reasons in relation to if you're trying to gather insights about how good a site is. Obviously you're thinking about asking people questions around, were you easily able to find what you needed? You can do things like saying, was our website easy to use on a scale of 1 to 10? How easy was it to, accomplish what you were here to do today? So again, what hope if you leave that, depending on the number of visitors that you get to your site, if you leave that running for a period of weeks, you should start to build up some good quantitative data to help build a picture of any common issues. And observed user testing, again, really important. It will give you some qualitative insights into problems with the existing site. Um, if you've never, you can absolutely use a specialist or an external expert to help you with that, but equally you can do it yourself. It's very much a not a complicated thing to do. There are some great guides out there. Super cool, have a brilliant guide. Very no jargon, just as a kind of to get you started with how to run observed user testing. And really, the essential thing is what you're doing with user testing is you're not asking users to kind of have a sort of click around the site. You're setting them specific tasks around, specific areas. So like, please try and please try and find a show that that you think you'll want to go and see, and then get through to the point where you have selected your day and ticket type and you're clicking book now, for example. Or see if you can make a donation, see if you can find out about a particular learning education program, etc. um, and I mentioned, so that's a lot of kind of quantitative and qualitative insights. You do, from a performance perspective, technical performance, you do also want to be looking at things like core web vitals. So that's a description from Google of what core web vitals is. It's basically a set of metrics that help to that look at basically things like how quickly does the site load, how quickly does the page load, how soon can people click or scroll, how efficiently are images and scripts and things like that being loaded. You might need a developer to help you understand the results of that, but it is important because core web vitals, typically developers use a tool called Lighthouse Page Speed, which is part of core web vitals, and that gives a score from 1 to 100 in a number of different areas. And the reason it's important is not just because of user experience, but it also affects your search rankings on Google. If essentially, the rationale from Google's perspective is if it's a poor experience for the user, then even if your site ostensibly has the right information, they don't want to prioritize that in search. Um, so yeah, an important one to look at it, and it looks at it based both on mobile and desktop. So you might have a great experience on desktop, but not on mobile. Um, So the other thing I that is uh, again probably fairly self-evident, but I think is worth being clear about is when you're gathering information to kind of inform how roadworthy your site is or isn't, I would definitely suggest that you speak to staff. They have probably, possibly, depending on how challenging the site has become. They've probably already expressed issues, but so this the comments on this screen and on the next one are taken directly from RFPs, anonymized RFPs that I have seen, and I think what they nicely illustrate is the difficulties of you know when often front of house staff, box office teams are dealing with, they hear firsthand about user frustration. So you can see here, users struggle to find what they're looking for, especially if it's something other than buying a concert ticket. An issue around accessibility with this one, reliability. So we receive a lot of calls from users unable to complete purchases online. That sort of stuff is really valuable insight. And again, the CMS, saying that it's inflexible, that it requires developers' help to make any changes and so on. And another example, again, from an RFP, this time one that highlights a problem with system integration. And the reason for pulling this one out, they're saying that the CMS itself uses outdated technology, but it also doesn't integrate properly with other admin systems. And that is just a very common reason for actually then needing to rebuild a site. So the technical limitations and frustrations can often be that tipping point in terms of, replacing or working with what you've got. So, assuming you've got all your data and insights, how do you then decide and then or help make a case for fixing or rebuilding? Um, Essentially, what I would recommend is that over a number of those areas, you categorize the results of your findings, and you can then label each one as kind of critical, or needs fixing but isn't critical, or to put it another way, fix, improve, or replace. So, for example, let's take something like user experience, a situation where you have confusing labels or missing alt text, absolutely that can just be fixed. If your navigation is outdated or the templates, if you're using a templated website, if that doesn't support new content formats, then that's much more of a potentially bigger piece of work, but arguably still could be improved upon. And then if your site is very old and wasn't designed mobile first, perhaps the CMS that you're using, the templates that you're using are fundamentally not working for what you need, then of course that then becomes a situation where you need to, perhaps completely replace. So you can, again, to help build a case, you can either, you might want to capture that information using a simple table like this and support it with sort of data points from the data that you gathered. Um, the link on this screen goes to a framework that I've built, which we're, as Andrew was saying, we're happy to share, which is a weighted framework. So what that does is obviously if the issue is much more serious around a structural technical thing, it weights that issue higher, and therefore, and essentially it will give you a score for each thing and tell you whether it's a fix, improve, or rebuild situation. I'm not suggesting that that framework is perfect, but I'm saying it's something you might want to play around with, and it's a tool that you can use to kind of understand the sort of different markers and how important they might be, and also again to build a case, to make, if you need to then make that case for funding. We were going to show the framework, but because of Cloudflare, we cannot. Never mind. I guess a couple of last things before I finish up. It is very rare in this day and age that if you need to make either a very significant update to a site or you need to completely rebuild it, that marketing teams or whoever owns the budget for website build is able to just go and do that without some kind of more exec level, or usually if it's a charitable organization, board trustee approval for spend. um, I know myself, as I'm on a board, I'm the chair of a board for an arts organisations, what trustees need to see. And, there needs to be clear evidence of problems. And bear in mind, you may be dealing with a non-technical group of people. So you need to make that as kind of clear, in as clear, accessible language as possible. Ideally, you want to be able to say, we believe that there is the option to improve our sales by X%, increase donations by Y. I realize that can be tricky to make those sorts of assessments, but always useful to do that kind of cost benefit analysis. Talk about how it aligns strategically with the organization, particularly if there's sort of new things that the organization is doing or is planning to do, and the website doesn't support that. And ideally, you want to talk about, we won't be coming to you in another 2 years to ask you for this money. Um, yes, so that's just a bit about kind of making that case. The other thing, just as a side note, really, on as part of this webinar is often people ask, um, how often should we rebuild the site? And alongside that, kind of, I guess, how often should you look at other, issues with the site? So I think we can think about it like a car. So you might check your tires and your oil weekly. You might do a kind of annual MOT. So do that sort of deep dive, do some observed user testing, check that things are still okay for users. Don't just assume that because over the year you might have been making all sorts of tweaks to that site, and you may have inadvertently um, introduced issues. And then, every 3 to 5 years, let's do a strategic review of really deep dive and think about whether the site, if by that point you may be starting to have some expressed issues, but if you haven't, then it's a good time to do that. And potentially, how often do you need a new website? Well, that's a usually, I mean, again, this is a generalization, but usually every 5 to 7 years. However, website as a software providers would argue differently, and we'll be covering more of that on in part two. Um, I guess the final bits from me is, this is just a checklist to take away in terms of the categories that you need to think about when you're assessing the effectiveness of your site. Sometimes people can be more, as in the people doing this, that looking after the website can be more aware of one thing than other. So it might be easy, you might find yourself getting hung up on it looks old, whereas actually there's a more fundamental issue to do with something else. So don't just focus on the things that people shout about the most, as well, I would say. A few things you can do now if you are sort of going into this process. Conduct a website MOT, speak to people who've recently gone through this process. I really recommend that. Um, those people who've kind of got war stories of all of every bit of this, including making a case to get funding. Um, you might want to look at that example framework that we'll share. How does your site score? Yeah, and always speak to staff and so on. Before we go to questions and sort of general bit of discussion, we are doing a follow-up to this next week, which is okay, so you do need a new website. How do I go about getting one? So some sort of tips and thoughts and advice on the process and common pitfalls of that process. I have been involved in many of those, and so I know the issues. Um, and we will be kind of talking about custom build versus website as a service and budgets. So hopefully you can join us next week. I think that is all from me for now, Andrew.
Thank you, Katie. Lots to take on there.
I'll
I did
stop.
post a link. Thanks to Kate and James from Supercool who shared that link to me. I put it in the chat of their user observed testing framework there. So thank you very much to Supercool for that. If you do want to put your questions in, head down to the Q&A, put those in now for anything that Katie's covered or maybe has missed, or any thoughts or observations you have. I know we have quite a few suppliers on the webinar, so I'll be interested to hear any ideas from them. Put it in, please put it in the Q&A and we'll read those out. I've got a few here straight away, which is I was talking at TPC 25 and a half to George Hill from Culture Suite, who was arguing the point about design and why do we design new websites on desktop rather we should design them on mobile and then make them work on desktop. So kind of flipping that round. Katie, given the fact of so much mobile traffic, should we be focusing the MOT more on the mobile journey and the observed testing more on the mobile journey than the desktop? I'm interested to find out how
Mm.
you think we should be balancing mobile versus desktop or tablet traffic.
I mean, it's a good question. As of now, all of the data points I've seen, and I'm referring now a lot to the benchmark report that I did when I was at Substrat. So that's like 75 plus websites, shows that most traffic, most visits happen on a mobile, but most purchases still happen on a desktop. So what you are seeing over time is that is changing. And I think we will absolutely reach a tipping point where it is just all mobile. But I think for now, you do still need to think about both. I wouldn't personally prioritize one over the other. I think you need to be absolutely clear that they both are performing well. Um, and so, I mean, something like Core Web Vitals, as I mentioned, it automatically will show you the difference between mobile and desktop for that reason, really. I think, I mean, this is just my opinion, really, but I think we're some way off desktop being kind of oh, it's irrelevant now. I think we'll get there, but for now, there are still certain things that people don't want to do on a mobile. So, yeah.
I would contend, though, that the reason. Sorry, I'm
He's
sorry. I'm
going
going
to
to have an argument.
disagree now.
I'm gonna
That's
have.
fine.
I think the reason I would contend the reason that the conversion is not there on mobile is because I think the buying journey of the ticketing system invariably is
Yes.
poor and people abandon and go back round. But we can have that discussion at
No,
another
well, I just to pick up
webinar
on
or conference.
so what I don't disagree with you there. And so I think that is a fair point. However, additional research, I mean, and this is outside of the sector, broader
Hmm.
sector, demonstrates that often it's about the size of the purchase value size, I mean. So still people are like they over a certain amount. So if you're buying tickets that are like 20 quid each, you're buying two tickets, there's less of a like mentally feeling like you need to go to a desktop and do it. But that's still to your point about like, well, if the
Hmm.
experience was good on a mobile, then it wouldn't be an issue that you were buying
Yeah.
150 quid tickets. But yeah, I get the point.
Okay. Couple coming in now. You can select. We've got a couple coming in, two or three actually that are anonymous. You can select the if you don't want to reveal who you are. You can select ask anonymously. So here we go. They're coming in now. How could an organization, Katie, work out the opportunity cost of a new website? So not just the webs where the website is now, but what KPIs we could achieve
Yeah,
for a new website.
it's such a good question. Um, so not to dodge the question, because I will answer it, but it isn't an exact science is the problem, especially with arts and culture, because our websites do so much more than just sell widgets. If you're an e-commerce site and then it's a lot easier to work that out because you are looking at the investment cost of that website, and then you're looking at the revenue it's going to bring over a period of time. You're looking at what you think that uplift is going to give you. It is harder with arts and culture. Really, really what you're getting down to is this is where we are now, and this is the income that is being generated. But we think, looking at all the data, that it's causing issues for around 10% of users, 20% of users, 50% of users. We estimate that to be, equivalent to X amount of revenue. It isn't an exact science, unfortunately. There's not like an exact formula, unless, I mean, maybe somebody else on the session has an exact formula. But I think you are looking when you get, and also when you, as I say, with arts and culture, you're looking often beyond that because you're looking at things like supporting participation and learning, education programs, and those things are difficult to quantify in a values driven way. Although you can look at things like funding streams and how you think doing XYZ might unlock some certain funding if you're then able to provide certain courses online for young people or whatever. It is tricky though. It's
Okay.
tricky.
Moving on, they're coming in. They keep coming in. So do get your questions in, or we got a couple of comments as well. But put questions and comments in. So I'm gonna I'm gonna summarize this one because it's quite a long one. Basically, the question is not is taking away. There's a lot of nuance, obviously, in fix and repair. This question says, really, is there such a thing as an average life expectancy of a website when simply replacing it becomes inevitable?
Um, oh, it's a yes,
Go
but
on.
it's a yes, but answer, I would say, unfortunately.
Hmm.
Typically, I would say any site that is getting 8 to 10 years old usually needs to be replaced, and that is because the often the CMS infrastructure that's built on is not great. Having said that, there are absolutely sites out there in the world, arts and culture specific sites, some of them from some of our biggest arts and culture
Hmm.
providers that are where the site is over 10 years old. Now, the reason that site still continues to function is because of I want to say this in a diplomatic way, so I don't identify who it is, but is if you have in-house development teams, if you have that kind of level of support, then you can usually keep a site going. Um, Whether or not you should is another question. But I would say the short answer is usually sort of over 8 years, a lot of sites start to become tricky, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I sold my car recently and it was 10 years old and I felt it had more miles in it, but you don't have Apple CarPlay or you don't have some things you kind of now, parking sensors, whatever, that you kind of expect and you can retrofit. But then to your point, the engine's got 100,000 miles on it. So yes, you can put Apple CarPlay in it, but you're still going to have an old engine or bumps
Yeah.
and
And
scratches.
actually, the flip side of that is what can happen, and I have seen this happen,
Hmm.
is that starts to become like this 10-year-old website starts to become like a comfort blanket for people. And even though it's got all these problems, they actually almost are too scared to do anything because it's like, oh, well, at least it's the devil we know kind of thing. And I would say that is rare, but that definitely does happen.
Yeah, and I think we could say that the same is true of ticketing systems, that the fact that
Oh,
we've
yeah.
customized it so much, or that we all know how to use it, or anything else, or it's linked to other systems in our business. Couple of comments first before we crack on. If you have got a question, please get it in now because we said 45 minutes, so we're almost up against it. A couple of comments more than questions. I prefer to look at seating plans on desktop. Mobile is too small a screen, which is a very I think it's probably the biggest problem we all have with trying to look at a complex theatre or cultural seating plan. So thanks
Yeah.
for that one. Shemai Kirsty, who says, agreed on value, can't possibly book flights or holidays on my phone because it feels like a desktop job. And I
I'm
will
with
again,
Kirsty there. I am
I'm
with
sorry.
Kirsty.
I'm sorry. I'm going to take the
You're
both of
not.
you on. Is that I regularly book. I mean, it's maybe because I do it regularly, but I
Yeah.
regularly book like big flights because I think the journey's really good. And whether it's app, and sometimes it's app based, which is another conversation for another day. But yeah, I think it's down for me. It's down to the journey. There's some that I
Yeah,
won't
absolutely.
book on. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And also as well as all of that, a Gen Z generation is absolutely much more attuned to booking anything and everything on a mobile and being much less, psychologically bothered by that. Not that it's psychologically bothered, but you know what I mean? That sense of like it doesn't feel right or whatever.
Yeah, I think, but I remember an AMA like 10 years ago, there was a talk and someone was talking about, back then it was millennials maybe, about that some of our potential audience members don't have a desk, they don't have a laptop, they don't have a desktop. Their only access to the internet is this thing, so it has to work on that. Last chance of questions. I've got one I want to get in, which is about leadership, which is something that I've dealt with as a software vendor for a long time in this space, is when we have a new CEO come in and she has the opinion that we should change something because at her previous venue she had this type of website, or she'd had a brand new website. How do we manage upwards that kind of leadership thinks the website's broken, but we can prove to them that it's not? Does it come back to data, or how do we manage upwards that way?
That is a interesting perspective. So you're asking like, what if it's the other way around? Like the site's fine, but actually they want to change everything for the sake of it. I mean, I think that so I at the end of the day, if you can prove that things like observed user testing are brilliant for that, because the problem with analytics in that situation is people can go, yeah, but it could be higher. But if you do observed user testing and people are like, yeah, this is good, it's fine, it's a good experience, then that can be hard to argue against. I I will say though that sometimes, and this is just the real world that we operate in, we all know that sometimes though people get their own way because they have been employed with a certain kudos, and that's kind of frustrating. All you can do is make your case using actual insights, rather than and try and take it away from being opinion based. Because often it will be like, oh, when I was there, this was really good. And it's like, well, comparative to what though? And so I think you just have to kind of try to go back to doing things like user testing, pop-ups on the site, because that'll give you a big sample. It should give you a good sample size quantitatively as well. Because the problem with user testing is sometimes leaders will say, "Oh, but that was only 5 people." Not that that matters, but they will
Yeah.
say that.
Okay. Well,
Right.
thank you very much. One snuck in at the last possible minute.
Oh.
Thank you, Emily. Going back to the mention of apps,
Yes.
Emily says, I think Katie and I often heard the question, do we need an app? But how often do you think the money would be better spent on improving the mobile experience than building an app?
good question, Emily. I think it depends what you want to do with the app. I think like if you want to do something, and I know, for example, uh, supplier to the sector, Easy Connect, they have white
Hmm.
label apps. Met Opera have had are a very, they use that as a case study very commonly because Met Opera use that for selling rush tickets. So last minute notifications pop up, buy the ticket. It's doing a very specific thing. That might be a complete pain for you to try and achieve on the mobile version of your site. So I think it comes down to, depends what you're trying to do with it. There are some, I think we've come full circle a bit with apps, haven't we? Because absolutely, there was a time when everyone was like, "Oh, we need a native app. It needs to be on."
Yeah.
But I think now it's more about only if it's actually giving you some kind of functionality that a mobile version of your site isn't able to deliver for technical reasons or whatever.
Yeah, yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
yeah.
I think so. I think we may actually end up having a some webinars on apps specifically. We did have one
Mm,
earlier in the year from Easy Connect, but I think it's well worth visiting. Thank you, Emily, for that
yeah,
one. We're going to wrap this up. Apologies that we didn't get the framework. We will send that out to everyone who
yeah.
registered, a link to that framework so you can have a look at it. Part two is next week of if you do think you need to buy a new website. This time next week, Katie and I will be attacking that subject as well. So all remains is to thank Katie for today and thank you for attending. And we hope to see you all again soon.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank
Bye.
you.